Afternoon team, and welcome into an overview of concrete walls and floors. I'm Rob Mountford, and today we're joined by Resene Architectural and Specifier rep David King, who's beaming in from Christchurch to join us. Hello there, David.
G'day, how you going?
Good, thank you. Now, David, quick bio on David, a very quick bio on David. He has over 20 years experience within the technical building industry, and 10 of those have been with Resene Paints, and he's also undertaken the NACE Level 1 Coatings Inspectors course. Now, the purpose of today's webinar is to discuss concrete walls and floors and the challenges they present when we're wanting to paint or clear coat them, along with how we would expect them to perform over time. Now, we're going to crack straight into this one, as the webinar is actually pre-recorded. David did a bit of recording earlier on, and it will roll through most of the 60 minutes that we have. So you can stay with us at the end for a bit of Q&A. We are going to come back on and do some Q&A live if we get questions come in through the webinar. So do bail out if you need to nearer the end. Now, we'll turn our webcams off now, and there'll be a short 5 to 10 second delay before the presentation commences. So do stay with us as the screen changes over.
Welcome to today's webinar from Resene. This one is on concrete walls and floors, basically an overview of the various factors to bear in mind when you're specifying for coating systems, whether they're paints or clears, on concrete walls and floors. So we'll start off with, this is the overall structure here, the type of surfaces we're dealing with, where are they in terms of where the projects are and how will they be used, and then looking at their overall life cycle, so not just beyond the initial paint job, how will the life cycle of the product be supported over time. So we'll start off with concrete walls. You've got an image there on the right of one that needs maybe something doing to it. So down the bottom here, what, where, when, how. So what type of walls, where are they, when and how can they be painted, and what with, and again looking at the longer life cycle, which we'll finish up with. So the types of concrete walls. Basically, we've split it up here into 4 broad types. So we've got precast tilt slab, concrete blocks, off form, which is the bottom right image there, and then the bagged or rendered, which could also be bricks. It doesn't have to be, it could be blocks, bricks, anything where there's a cementitious, like plastered finish over the top of a substrate. So ultimately what's being painted is cementitious. So we'll just run quickly through those, just looking at some sort of the main factors involved with those. So precast tilt slab, would be the predominant system used now in larger commercial projects, public projects. It's a good way to get a big surface up in an efficient way, and obviously structurally advantageous as well. Tilt slab in itself should really be inherently weatherproof, so it doesn't really need a coating to keep moisture out or keep the rain out, the weather. It would be more for aesthetic or other functional reasons. The tilt slab of today is often very smooth, and this is something that we need to think about or factor in. The production has got very good, and you can get tilt slab surfaces that are almost like glass. If you close your eyes and put your hands on them, you wouldn't really know the difference. But the appearance and the chemistry of them can still vary. You can have a tilt slab wall which will have a whole series of panels all put up, and the plan may be for one continuous clear finish over the whole lot, but when they're actually built and erected, you may find that some have some variations in them, and that won't be covered up by a clear, so that might require a bit of a plan B. The trick to making the tilt slabs so smooth, or part of the process in them, is the use of form oils and release agents. So this is something that a painter would have to take into account, but everyone should be aware of it, is that those have to be removed from the surface so that anything coating-wise will actually adhere. They're designed to help the slab come out of the form it was made in, a bit like greasing a muffin pan. So muffins come out, it's the same principle, but if you don't account for that, then you can end up with a surface that looks amazing, but then the paint just doesn't really stick to it very well. So they do have to be dealt with. So that's part of the process with those. Concrete blocks are the next popular option. Probably nowadays you're probably more likely to find them residential or smaller commercial type work, exterior or interior, sometimes painted over, sometimes a clear feature of the the aesthetic. The rough texture of a concrete block gives plenty of surface area for the paints to stick to. So you get good mechanical adhesion with concrete blocks because they are always a little bit rough, they're full of holes. The bad side of the downside, I guess, of that is that porous surface is also where moisture can get in, and the way that concrete blocks are put up with mortar between and lots of joins means that concrete block walls are never inherently weatherproof, and they do need to be covered and protected and designed, I guess, properly to stop them becoming giant sponges. So, which will, and if it gets into the surface, then gets into the substrate and then needs to get out, it could cause a problem for any coating that's been applied. So moisture is definitely something that needs to be managed really well with a concrete block finish, but you can get an amazing result when it's done properly. Yeah, these last two finishes are sort of grouped together. So this is the off form and rendered concrete looks or finishes. So they're often decorative in their own right, so they may not really need a heavy amount of coating. That might be a bit sort of counterproductive. Having said that, coatings that you do apply could either highlight or obscure features, like shadow lines won't show up so much on a dark finish, but then on a light finish might not be practical for a situation. So that's part of the system that you'd need to look into, or maybe even sample if you can. It's also with a textured surface, there'll be often sharp edges and lumps as part of the texture, which can't really be avoided, but they are potentially sort of stress points for a film, because of a paint film or a coating film will naturally be a bit thin when it goes around a sharp corner. So it's, again, potentially something we look at maybe doing a lighter sort of type coating rather than putting on something super heavy, which would then maybe eliminate some of the texture, which is, again, counterproductive. And that texture can also make these things a little bit hard to clean, but that can be helped with maybe some gloss level change, like more gloss, or with a product like AquaShield, which has a sort of a self-cleaning function, or in its chemistry, the way it sits on the surface. So those are the broad types of substrate, or cementitious substrate, and the main factors. The next step is sort of zooming out to where the actual project is in the first place. So we have, the concrete walls could be exterior or interior. They could be sheltered, exposed, so they could be exposed to all the weather. They could be exterior, but in a courtyard, so they really don't get a whole lot of weather under a very deep eave. The whole project could be coastal, could be in the mountains, alpine, could be just straight out windy, gets a lot of dust blown on it. Or it could be in the middle of the city, urban, high traffic, a lot of residues from exhausts and bits and pieces just in the air, which over time can collect and on the right surface or the wrong surface can be quite noticeable. So apart from that, the next would be the actual use, like the use of the area that the wall is in. So is it private, commercial, public? So is it just a house? Is it a shop or a workshop or an office? Is it a school? does the coating need to be primarily aesthetic, or does it also have to be functional, like a weather type scenario, or both? There's also the ease and regularity of maintenance to think about, and it's worth getting it talked about and thought about early in the piece. The image there, the top left one, the yellow wall and ceiling, or at least the yellow wall, that's in a school. So while it's a brave choice in a school, and it's particularly on a stairwell where there'll probably be a fair amount of traffic up and down every day, at least with schools, they do close 3 or 4 times a year for holidays. So there is a window to do maintenance on something like that. If that was on the exterior of a building high up facing north, then it would be maybe a lot more difficult to look after. And so that's where the expectations of your clients and yourselves and whoever's using the building about how the coating will last and how it will perform need to be clarified, as soon as you can, really, in the process, just to know what level you're going to need to go to from a product point of view. The other main factor really in the life cycle, or the eventual use of the product, will also be the condition of the substrates. So both existing issues in existing substrates and potential issues in a new substrate. And sometimes you can get some clues by the area where the development's being done, or just from straight out looking at concrete surfaces adjacent to what you're working with. So the biggest one, as already mentioned, is water ingress. And one of some of the best evidence of water ingress is efflorescence, which is that image top left, which is the white lime basically being washed out of the mortar between those concrete blocks. And concrete blocks, as discussed, are not inherently waterproof. So the water will if it gets in there, it can work into the mortar and it will wash out the lime. That won't happen forever. Eventually it does sort of stop, but it can be fairly unsightly in the meantime, and a difficult, sort of time-consuming thing to clean away. There's also the even more obvious evidence of water ingress, which would be a blister like the one on the right image there, which basically is a concrete block wall, doesn't have a cap on the top, so it's unsealed. Moisture coming down through the mortar lines and is caught behind the paint film there. So if that blister was popped, it would just leak water all down the wall. It possibly goes away when it's hot weather, and it probably comes back when it rains a lot. So that wall there, as a repaint project, there's really no point in painting that unless someone's going to cap it properly and stop further moisture from getting in. The other thing you would either predict or be aware of or be careful of or already know is happening would be graffiti. It's pretty obvious on the building on the bottom left there that there's an issue with some artistes coming around and putting some marks on the wall. So if you were redoing that wall, or if you're building somewhere in the vicinity, you'd potentially look at graffiti as it was definitely a factor that something's going to come along. There's a good risk of it, and that would be something that you would need to maybe account for in your specification and your systems that you look at. And then there's also just fading, blistering damage, and just generally patchy. So on existing walls, you'll often see all of those things. The use of bright and very dark colours, often the fading will be more noticeable. And then damage can cause blistering, or blistering can cause damage, and then repairs can cause the patchiness, where you come back with the same paint 3 years after the first paint job, you put the patch on to cover up whatever the damage or the graffiti, and then it hasn't faded, obviously, because it's new, so then it ends up you get a patchy finish. Sometimes we actually get asked, people say, can you match this paint? And we can look at the bucket, but the fact that it's faded for 5 years means probably not. It makes it a bit difficult. So if we move on to having thought about those factors, if we then move on to the actual product types, there's basically two broad types. So we have solid paints, or we have clear finishes. So I've got the sort of some pros and cons here. So the paint creates an opaque film. So like the blue wall there, it's a solid blue color. You can't see anything through it. All you see is blue. So it covers up all the visual irregularities. If that wall's painted properly, you'd stand back at 2 meters, you just see a solid piece of blue. So that's, like I said, the visual irregularities, but it won't cover up. In fact, it may even highlight any lumps and bumps and holes. So you can look at a particularly tilt slab, you can look at a piece of tilt slab and go, that looks great, let's paint it. And it's not until you put paint on it you realise that it's got maybe some texture differences. There might be a rough patch which will never show up when it's unpainted, but as soon as you paint it, it will show. It's not a paint problem, that's a texture difference. Likewise, any lumps that you might see it when you look at it at a very low angle towards the sun, you might see some variation. It's the same, it is the same principle really as plasterboard inside. It looks great when it's stock, but it's when suddenly you make it all one color, that's when you notice other things. Also, any paint film that goes on a surface is vulnerable to adhesion failure and splitting, and also eventually, because it is a color, there's a chance of color change and gloss change over time. So adhesion failure and splitting sort of go together, and that's often from contamination on a surface. Painting, particularly on commercial projects, painting very large walls outside when there's dust and sand and dirt and everything could be blowing around, salts near the sea. Any of those could land on the surface, even between coats, and cause adhesion issues, possibly way down the track, which can be frustrating, to say the least. And also, yeah, there's the chance of some colour change over time. And if you paint a tilt slab wall light grey or white, it'll probably look pretty much the same 5-10 years from now. If you go for a super dark blue or a bright red or something, then there is more likelihood of a change over time, but it won't sort of fade overnight. It does take years, but it's just the reality, frankly, of painted solid color. So often the preference is to go to a clear finish. So a clear finish obviously can't fade because it doesn't have any color to fade, and it maintains the concrete look. You want it to look natural and you want it to look like concrete, and assuming your tilt slabs are all nice and even and things, then a clear look over the concrete is a good idea. The downside, I guess, of a clear finish is that clears can't hide anything either. So if there are any variants, a clear definitely won't help in terms of visual irregularity. It won't make it, probably won't make it look any worse, but it won't hide it. They're also generally less porous. So if moisture is caught, if there's a little bit of moisture caught in behind a clear, it's more noticeable and more likely to become a bit of a problem than that same moisture behind an acrylic paint like a Lumberside or an X200, because they will let more moisture transfer through them, breathe out, whereas clears tend to be less porous, but that then has advantages in other ways, particularly if you're looking to protect the surface from external impact or abrasion, where you want it to be as tough as possible. You want it to be quite like a shell. So there's sort of again, there's a bit of a trade-off. There's also now new in our range is a concrete wash product. So that's a clear coat with some color in it, but it gives you a see-through color. You can still see that it's concrete underneath, so you're not having to paint it to make it look like concrete. It is concrete, but it has effectively a colored lens over it. So that's an interesting new product type for us, and that I think will have some good specific uses in projects where you just don't want it to be, you want it to be concrete, but just with a little bit of added visual interest. So if we look at paints, then again, they break down to a couple of different types. So we'll start with probably the most popular ones overall, which would be the single pack paints. So a single pack is, as described, pretty much ready to go out of the bucket or the tin. They have nice short recoat times. A lot of them are waterborne and low in VOC, so not really any fumes off them, and they provide good adhesion and protection for the bulk of the surfaces the bulk of the time. So our tilt slab go-to there would be X200, which is the image there. So that's weather tightness membrane. So it's a very thick product, and it builds up to a nice thick dry film to give good protection, you know, particularly on something like concrete blocks, where 3 coats on concrete blocks meets the industry standard for weather tight performance in that of a concrete block. Well, the other one that shows up a lot of the time, and particularly for like repaints where there's already a lot of paint on the wall, would be lumber which is a mid-thickness sort of standard acrylic, I guess. Mostly originally used as a fence paint, but now lumber has a lot of other uses, and it is used a lot on cementitious work, and maybe also where you want to, it's a little bit, being a bit thinner, it will work its way into a texture maybe a little bit better. And then I mentioned earlier AquaShield, and the AquaShield is the self-cleaning product that has if you look under a microscope when it's dry, it has like a sort of a series of shields sort of piled on top of each other, not dissimilar to some plants and animals, I guess, where they have sort of layers sort of overlapping each other, and then sort of when water hits it, it runs down over the shields and it takes the dirt with it, so it creates a self-cleaning effect. And then we also have, for the tilt slabs, our specs as standard would talk about concrete cell 301. So that's an adhesion primer for tilt slab, but only where you're doing a painted coloured system. You wouldn't use that for a clear, that would be a waste of time. It's for precisely the job of making tilt slab, giving it the best adhesion for the subsequent coats. Sometimes a 2-pack paint is what's required, so it's sort of generically called an epoxy. So epoxies are a little bit more involved from a specifying point of view. It's not really your issue. It's you know, the painters need to factor in using epoxies because of the time frames and the realities of making it, because you have to mix it. There has an induction time where you mix it up and then let it sit for 15 minutes while it sort of gets to know each other. Then it has a fixed pot life. So once you've mixed up a 4-litre unit, you've only possibly got 3 hours to use it. And then you have specific curing and recoat times. Some of them, if you leave them too long, you have to sand them before you can recoat them. So there's a few technical issues, but not really an issue at the specifying part of the function, part of the process. They can also be smelly. There can be some fumes off some of them. So Aquapoxy is an example of waterborne. So it's a medium heavy duty sort of low fume, can be used on walls and actually on floors. So we'll be talking about it again shortly. And then in our solvent-borne or waterborne, Uracryl 400 series of solvent-borne, 800 series of waterborne. So that gives you a much tougher abrasion-resistant layer and a very wide colour range as well. Some products only come off certain bases, so you can only do certain colours, but Uracryls give you a very wide range of colours as well. So that can be a useful product where you just need the best protection you can get, and it also has to be a certain colour. That would be an option and well worth considering. So in the clear finishes, it's the same deal. We have single packs and we have 2-pack type products. So single packs, again, ready to go from straight away. Nice short recoat times. You could easily get 2 or 3 coats on in a day on an area, depending on obviously how big it is. So concrete clear is something that we would spec every day for interior concrete block walls or interior tilt slab, where you just want to put a glaze coat on it. You still want it to look like concrete, but you just don't want any dusting or anything rubbing off on clothes or anything under contact. Concrete clear gloss also gives very good adhesion for exterior systems. You put that on first and it sort of glues up the surface, and then it gives plenty for the next surfaces, next products to adhere to, and also stops them getting into the concrete block or concrete tilt slab and making it look wet and dark. And some products, when you put them onto a concrete surface, they automatically make it look wet and dark, which isn't always what people are after. Another really useful product is Aquapel, and there's a couple of versions, but usually we're specifying the solvent-borne Aquapel, and that's a spray-on product. You just load it up into a garden sprayer and you just spray it, you saturate the surface with it. The image there on the right shows a concrete block wall where that square metre had Aquapel applied to it, just sprayed on, let it dry, and then hose the wall. Everywhere else it's gone dark because the moisture, the water's got in. On the Aquapel applied section, it just bounces off, and there would probably still be a little bit of moisture in there, but nothing like what you get on the rest. The other beauty of Aquapel is you can paint over it, you can clear coat over it, so you can do anything. If it turns out to not be enough protection, or you want to do something else, then just do it. You don't have to take it out. You wouldn't be able to get it out anyway, but it's effectively sitting in the surface, just doing its job, but it won't stop you doing anything else later on if you decided to upgrade. So often I'll talk to specifiers and sort of say, why don't we just use Aquapel and then see how it goes, particularly if it's an area of concrete that's going to be easy enough to get to, so there's no need to go back and get more scaffolding or a cherry picker or something. If it's a low risk area, you know, maybe we don't have to go straight to graffiti shield and heavy duty systems. Maybe just Aquapel on its own would be fine. And when it stops beating off water, you just apply more. So it's very simple. It really is a brilliant product for a lot of situations. It's probably all that's needed in a lot of situations. So sometimes it's not enough though, and you will need to go to the 2-pack situation options. So here we've got, these are hard wearing abrasion resistant coats. They have there's the same considerations on site as with a paint type system. It's all about getting it mixed right and not painting too long, and there's a few tricks to making them work, but again, good painters know all these and won't have any issue with it. So a Eurocryl 400 series is probably the best overall in protection, and also has different options and gloss levels and things. We have Imperite, which is a clear and has really the best adhesion to a very smooth or honed surface. So if you've got glassy smooth surfaces that need to be clear coated and you need very good adhesion to them, then Imperite would actually be our go-to there. And then Eurocryl Graffiti Shield is a waterborne version of Eurocryl, and that one gives good, it's clear, and it gives a good abrasion resistance for cleaning up tagging. So anti-graffitis, they don't stop the tagging happening, and it still happens, but it's about how they can protect the underlying surface, whether it's a clear system, it could be part of a clear system, or it could be used over an acrylic like a painted system, but we'll come on to that shortly, like right now. So yeah, anti-graffiti coatings in essence are just a clear, highly abrasion resistant layer. So it's a glaze coat, a barrier coat that you can see through, but then when you go, you can scrub it without affecting what's underneath. In the market, there are roughly two types. There's film forming or sacrificial. So a film forming is a painted on layer that dries hard and cures and adheres to the other layers and stays there. A sacrificial approach involves applying a product, sometimes sprayed, sometimes rolled, sometimes brushed on, which is designed to just wear out over time, and then you just put more on. Our preference is for film forming, so that's where the Graffiti Shield comes in, or even Eurocryl 400 series works. It can be used in the same function. But whichever way you go, whether you go film forming or you decided to look at something sacrificial, the two rules really for anti-graffiti effectiveness are smooth surfaces, smooth substrates, and gloss. So the smoother the better, and the glossier the better. Both of those are major factors in making the surface simply cleanable. If the surface is rough like for instance brick, and then has a low sheen anti-graffiti on it, which might aesthetically look good when, you know, when the building's new. When that gets tagged, that won't be as easy to clean as a smooth, high gloss surface, and all the cavities and small holes and porosity of the surface. If it's been spray painted with a large image, you will probably be able to clean most of it off because it's sitting on the surface, but anything that's sitting in those small depressions in the surface could end up just not being able to get them out. And so you'll end up with like a ghost of whatever was painted on, and very difficult to remove. The other, speaking of ghosts, this image on the right here shows another issue that unfortunately is just the reality with anti-graffiti treatment. If an anti-graffiti system just gets painted over with another paint, which can often be a maybe slightly overzealous council contractor or something who sees graffiti and says, I have to paint over that because it needs to be covered up. That's what's happened on this building here on the right. So you can see at the end there the wall's shiny. That was the original anti-graffiti finish. So it was a black painted wall. This is taken on a sunny day, but that was a black painted wall with a semi-gloss anti-graffiti on it. It got tagged. Contractors came along and painted over it with an acrylic paint, which is this sort of more grey looking colour. It was a black, but it wasn't a good match. Then that got tagged with this artwork we can see here, and then someone's come along to then try and clean that artwork off the acrylic paint, which is the abrasion, because it can't handle the abrasion. It's just ended up making it a mess. So it probably looks worse than the original graffiti did. So that was, having that anti-graffiti layer on there was kind of a waste of time, because these other guys have effectively made it null and void by painting right over it. The answer here is probably, to make that wall look good, would just be to recoat the whole thing in a semi-gloss black like our Sonics product. And then if it gets tagged again, either do nothing or carefully try and clean off, which may not be that easy, or given that it's black, maybe just paint over it. That's the one advantage of super dark coloured walls, is that they're targets, but then possibly also the repaints. At least you might even get away with just one coat, but you know, one or two quick coats would cover that up without having to damage, do more damage than it's worth. Another part of commercial work, particularly, or anything in interior or exterior, would be the needs for colours, specifically custom colours, branded colours, things like that. So where you are working on a project that needs a specific shade of blue or yellow or red, we can work off RGB and PMS systems, or even just physical sample, a piece of stationery, business card, things like that. So if we can get something, then it's usually pretty straightforward to get a good copy made and then put on file. When you're dealing with this type of situation, particularly if we're talking with dark or bright colours, you might want to take some extra care and also be mindful of things like, fading, and also where the cool colour would help. It goes back to the original points there about expectations. What does your client's needs in terms of how long do they expect it to last? If they tell you that they've always had problems with the paint fading and that it's going to keep on fading, there's no guarantee that our paint won't fade too over time. It may not fade as badly. We'd need to know what's previously been used, but if they have a bad track record with stuff fading out, then maybe they need to look at a different way of approaching it, and paint might not actually be the answer. So it's much better discussion to have early in the piece rather than after it's been painted or 2 years down the track when it looks like it's 10 years old. We occasionally get asked for metallics, and again, this is just putting this in as a general reference point. Metallics, if you do come across them or the need for them, they're best if they're sprayed, because any repairs to metallics, if you have a metallic finish maybe on an interior wall or an exterior feature of a building, and we don't come across these that often, but if you do, if they ever get damaged or need repainting or touching up, then they'd need to be sprayed. That ideally should be sprayed again, which can be tricky because if you brush over a metallic, you'll often see it. Not always from every angle, but there'll be some angles you'll stand at and you'll be able to see that the flakes in the metallic are sitting differently because they've been brushed. They're not sort of random like when they're sprayed. And with any special finishes, a metallic I think would count as one of those, or if you're dealing with particular color combinations and things, then it's important to get the painters who are doing the job to, if they can, if there's time, of course, is to sample it first and make sure everyone's happy with what they're going to do before they do hundreds of meters of it, and make sure that there's no compatibility issues with existing paints that might be in part of the space or with the substrates that are being coated. So yeah, those are all just extra things to think about within the concrete wall space, and then you can confidently do something like that image with the yellow and the red and the blue there, which would be, I imagine, for some painters a complete nightmare, but it's obviously done and to be fair, quite effective. So now we move on to concrete floors, which is another, really in some ways, a completely different ballgame. There's a lot of things in common you'll see with concrete walls in terms of how you assess them, but there are a couple of key things that need to be really done properly to make these make a concrete floor last. So I've put it down the bottom there, a little alliteration: the proper preparation prevents poor performance. There are other versions of that saying loosely, but it's true. In the case of floors, it's all really is all based on the prep. Otherwise, it's can be definitely very problematic down the track. So we start off here, concrete floors in terms of types, there really aren't a whole lot of variations. The concrete floors generally are poured, or formed smooth concrete surface. So what comes down here is the condition of the substrate is kind of the first issue. So, new floors have various aspects that need to be accounted for, but with existing floors particularly, sometimes it's kind of obvious what's happening with the floor and what needs to be looked at. So we're looking at the texture of the floor, any falls that it has in it, any requirement for drains, things like that, the evidence of any contamination or damage or cracks in existing floors, or the risk of contamination or damage in a new floor, like where the space is going to be used. And also more so with existing is dampness. So if like that top right image, if you've got an obviously damp floor and it looks like also some of the wall, then that needs to be sorted out before you look at doing coatings, because coating that would be a waste of money and time. It's not going to stick. It may adhere in some places, but you would have issues. So much the same as walls. It's the initial scoping process comes around to what is this floor? What type of floor is this? Is it someone's garage? Is it a shopping mall? Is it an office? Is it a warehouse with forklifts going around, or is it a food factory? What is the traffic type? So is it just feet? Is it going to get wheels, trolleys, cars, trucks, aircraft? What's the level of the traffic type and how much of it, and the sheer, like literally even the sheer weight of it, or the nature of it in terms of what's going to be actually touching the surface. Like walls, does it need to be, is it just decorative to look nice, or does it actually have to have some sort of functions? And also, quite early in the pieces, it's good to establish what the turnaround time is for a flooring system, whether it's in the new build or whether it's in an existing, like a repaint scenario, because tight turnaround times, if there's only going to be a day or two available to do it, then that may eliminate some products straight away, or it may call up specialist products which can be done in very short timeframes. So in terms of like specific requirements, the type of thing that often comes up, and this is again, a lot of these floors are industrial, but some of these factors may apply to sort of smaller commercial or even residential. So you can have coloured zones or markings. What's the requirement there? That's again worth factoring in, because not all flooring paints particularly can be done in all colours. So if there's a need for bright reds and bright yellows and bright greens or something, that may not be possible in some products. So it's a good thing to know early in the piece and establish what the requirement is. Anti-slip, again, there's different ways of doing that. So that would be something that we would want to look into and make sure that we've got the right type of performance. Occasionally there's a requirement for anti-static, just for like plant rooms or anywhere where there's a lot of electrical gear, for instance, or anything combustible. There often is a requirement for an anti-static type finish, and also hygienic for like food production, anything which is going to be steam or chemical cleaned. Those are areas where the hygiene, like the porosity of the surface, all these things, how much bacteria will or won't get into it and can or can't be cleaned out of it. Those factors will play into the choices. So again, like walls, you've got your single packs versus your 2-pack epoxy type products, and then you've got solid color versus a clear. So paints will give you the even appearance and the ability to do your colors and various things, but it is vulnerable to abrasion, and if a painted floor does fail, like it gets scratched, you will notice it. It's going to be there and it can't really be avoided. And the thing with floors compared to walls is that we can't not sort of touch floors. You could paint a wall and it could never be touched again, but a floor will have traffic on it and it will have people walking on it and things will get dropped on it. So it's more at risk in those situations. Clear finishes, again, like walls, they can look great, and if the concrete already looks fantastic and you just want to seal it, then the clear finish makes sense and it won't fade. But we do have it's more possible that a moisture issue would show in a clear finish because of the fact that it's got no way to hide it. A white painted floor with a little bit of a moisture issue or something wouldn't be a big deal. You'd probably never notice it, but on a clear you may. The other thing that can be tricky is that it's difficult to do anti-slip with a clear finish. The anti-slip type media that we use, which will be added into the paint or broadcast into the paint, can actually cause it to get a bit cloudy, which is again sort of counterproductive. So that's one where you may want to look at doing your anti-slip via strips or texturing of the surface or some other way of making it anti-slip without relying on the clear coat and having something in the clear coat. So if we're looking at just like a single pack product for floors, so this, I guess, the simpler end of the market. So they have, just like the walls, they have short recoat times. You can get on 2 coats in a day, 3 coats even. Durability is good. It wouldn't be as good as the tougher epoxy type products, but then it's also maybe easier to live with too. So one of our popular ones is Walk On, which is just a tough acrylic paint for foot traffic. And then we have non-skid deck and path, which is an even more, I guess, aggressive texture to it, which is again foot traffic only, and also a limited color range. So you can see where the simpler products, sometimes there can be a bit of a compromise in terms of it's simpler to put on, but maybe doesn't have as many options aesthetically, at least in terms of color choice. Where a floor needs more protection, we're talking about our 2-pack epoxy urethane type products. So as with walls, they need a little bit more management on site to get the mixes right and the timing right and all those things, but they are the way to go for better protection, particularly with heavier traffic. So aquapoxy is a waterborne epoxy that we use in our own colour shops, and in a nice sensible mid-grey called jumbo. It would be good for garage floors. It can handle car traffic. It can handle feet, wheels, trolleys, any of that sort of thing. It has a reasonable colour range as it goes. But if you want to go up another notch from there, you could go to the Eurocrawl 400 series. So it's a solvent-borne, and it allows you to do just about any colour. So I've had a client wanting a bright yellow garage floor. That's Eurocrawl all day, would be the only way to do that, and it's come out really good. So yeah, if neither of those, if neither a single pack or even a epoxy is going to perform to the level needed, or if you, as I mentioned before, if you're looking at really quick turnaround times or very specific requirements, another option that within the Resene group, available through the Resene group from our Altex channel, would be a Flowcrete range, which there's a lot of products in there, but broadly speaking, they're very high build, very thick builds products. So they go on nice and thick, and they give a lot of abrasion and impact resistance. There's a whole lot of variations that you can add for anti-slip, anti-static, and various other aspects. So it's something to consider where the client or the requirement is going to be for a quick turnaround, minimum downtime, and maximum performance. So generally, I'd say that they definitely won't be cheaper than most of the paint options we would have. But if you're looking at the overall life cycle, they probably do pay off in terms of less hassle and just straight out performance over a longer period of time. So it's something that would be worth talking to a client about again early in the piece and say, what are your realistic requirements floor-wise? Because if it's a food factory running 24 hours a day with the same performance over and over and over, the same motions and the same wear and tear on the floor over and over and over, then they would potentially be better to spend more money at the start and not run the risk of having to close the factory every 3 or 4 or 5 years even for days on end to get it redone. So with walls, didn't go too much into preparation, but as I said at the start of the section, preparation is the absolute key to doing anything to do with concrete floors. They need to be, as every data sheet says, clean and dry. And some of them mention a black tape test, which is literally putting black electrical tape on the floor. And if it doesn't come up black, then it's not clean enough. So we're talking floors that would be, vacuumed and water blasted and then vacuumed and then brushed again and then vacuumed again. They should be ground. So basically the texture of the concrete should look like 180 grit sandpaper. There has been, or people have over the years, used acid etching, which is the image there on the top left for this, but while it can clean the surface and get it very clean, it doesn't really add enough grit or enough grittiness profile to the surface for the paint to stick to. So it tends to come out too smooth. Plus the acid's got to go somewhere, and that's going to be difficult to manage. Whereas straight out grinding means that the whole surface is rough enough that the paint will stick to it well. And the whole objective here is for the paint to stick to the floor better than it sticks to anything else. So the conditions have to be right for the actual painting. So warm enough for the painting and the drying. So that maybe comes down more to the time of year. If you have a client who says that we want to build a new factory, or we want to renovate our factory, and we can only do it during winter because that's when we're our off season, then that's straight away in a bit of an alarm bell for what would work as a floor paint. So even just from our end, knowing when the product's going to be applied roughly would help us steer in the right direction, so that you don't specify a product that's just never going to work at that time of year, or it'll look like it works and then it fails prematurely. So, and then after painting, it's also about the aftercare, I guess, and giving it a full chance to cure and stick. So the bad one for that has been it's been garage floors. The garage gets painted, and then a day later, someone drives in a car or a motorbike after being out for a period of time. The tyres are hot, and unfortunately, the paint sticks to the tyres, and the tyres are designed to grip. They're designed to grip roads. The paint grips to the tyre better than it grips to the concrete that's only just been put on. So you would get tear off from that. Often though, you'd look at the paint that came up and find that it was actually a bit dirty too, so that wasn't helping. So yeah, it's definitely not one to rush, and it's definitely something to do at the right time of the year, and it definitely has to be a relatively rough or 180 grit profile surface for the paints to have enough adhesion. So now we're looking basically at the life cycle. So of either walls or floors, once you've done all the prep, you've worked out the right system, you've got the colors the client wants, you've got the whole thing applied and painted, everyone's happy, scaffolding's come down, everyone's using the space and loving it. What do you do next, or what do various people have to do next to get the most out of it? So off the bat, there's a variety of issues that will potentially come up with, particularly with walls and with floors. And these are things that would be indicators of issues, or they would be, point in the direction of what needs to be done maintenance-wise, for instance. So we can look, often walls over time, over the first year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, they'll get dirty. So that can be from exhaust, which is like that top left image there. That shadow under that edge is mostly dirt, not actually shadow. That's in a car park for a gym in a suburban shopping mall, so it doesn't even have that much. It's round the back, so it doesn't even have that much traffic going past it. You can also get wind-blown dirt and fungi or mold, like the other image top right, which is that same building, and that concrete's actually got a fall on it, on the top of that concrete block, so there's no moisture issues further down, but the pores have caught the dirt and the wind-blown seeds, spores, whatever, and then it started to mold up. The bottom right image is a building on a seagull flight path, so that it's right next to a tip, and the seagulls all come past on the way to the tip to look for something interesting, probably something to eat, and they are dropping off stuff on the way to the tip, and so that's black. Probably wasn't the best choice for that wall. And then that other image, bottom left, that's just showing a fantastic piece of blistering, which has either come from that crack, looks like a crack higher up on the wall where moisture might have got in and travelled down, or it's coming from the bottom edge up, or a bit of each. It possibly moves in and out with the weather too, like on a dry day it's maybe not as noticeable, and then on a wet day it sort of swells. That's an indicator that there's possibly something more important than the paint going on that needs to be addressed. You'd also expect over time you'd see colour changes and gloss changes. You get fading, and glosses tend to literally lose their sheen over time, so they'll go from gloss down to semi-gloss, and if you leave it long enough, you end up with I guess in some cases, a dead flat finish. So yeah, it all really comes down to how far along those issues go, or what becomes evident over a period of time does come down to maintenance and who's doing what. So the first aspect of that is just doing the inspections. Like, someone actually has to look at the stuff and notice it, and maybe keep some sort of records, or have a twice a year run round where they note what needs to be done and then actually do it. So that's the cleaning of the surface, so that you can remove the rubbish or debris or dirt or whatever it is that's stuck on the surface, so that it doesn't attract more, or attract animals, or attract insects. which then decide this is not a bad place to live and affect your finish. Preventative maintenance is always good, and often it's kind of obvious what needs to be done. Cleaning out gutters and various exercises like that around the property to stop the excess damage. Trimming back trees near concrete, near a wall or a building. If you have trees too close and it's windy, those trees will get bigger, and when they get bigger, they will rub against the wall and they will possibly eventually take the paint off. So that's something to, I guess, try and foresee in as much as how the plantings are done, if you're talking to a landscape type people, in terms of where they position stuff. And then eventually it will come down to a point where it's really is just about recoating. The paint has had a life cycle, or it's been damaged, or for whatever other reason it needs to just put new paint on. So we move onto that. So as a general rule, like in our promise of quality, our life cycle for a new exterior or interior paint job on a cementitious surface would be about 10 to 12 years, based on a good condition substrate, what you're starting with. So that's straight away, anyone who thinks they want to spec a paint system and it should be good for the next 20 years is possibly being a bit unrealistic. Other aspects to factor in will be, in terms of doing the recoating and when it gets done and how it gets done, would be the space available to do it, the potential for having to, particularly with commercial jobs, is there any traffic control or anything that will you have to block off streets to do this sort of job, and what time of year will it be available? Again, if the client tells you that they do all their maintenance work in winter, then you need to pick products that will work in winter. Otherwise, it's wasting everyone's time. You can get around, obviously access can be managed in different ways, and in the bottom right image there's actually a drone that does painting, so it's someone on the ground can drive that thing up multiple stories up the side of a building and spray the system. So I imagine more of that will come along in time. There's also potentially the approach around partial versus a full repaint. Do you need to paint all the building all at once, or do you paint one wall every year and just cycle your way around, or is the design sectionalized somehow so that you can paint 3 sections and then stop and it's not too noticeable because there's some sort of visual break, and then do the next 3 sections the next time the weather's favorable? So doing a 200, 150, 200 meter long wall in one color when it can only be done in winter and there's going to be a lot of rain, that's a tricky thing to paint all in one go. And so that is potentially something to plan around. And also with any existing coatings, we need to make sure that we're compatible with the existing coating. Ideally identify what it is. Sometimes there's records of what it is, a lot of times there isn't. But I get an identification of what you're dealing with as existing coatings. One of the issues we strike, not just in concrete but across the board with painting over existing coatings, if we don't know what they are or how many there are, is that the last coat that goes on, as particularly an acrylic paint like an X200 or a Lumbicide, as it dries, it creates tension as it dries up. So there is a risk that you will put one coat too many, like the last coat that goes on is just one too many, and the pull of that drying actually pulls on the existing coats underneath, and then they give way, so they lose adhesion. They're effectively overloaded. And paint's actually quite heavy when you think about it as a solid thing. So it is worth looking at what's on there now and how well adhered it is and how much of it is, so that we can get good adhesion to it, but then if we do get good adhesion to it, the existing paints themselves have enough adhesion to the substrate. And it may get to a point where if there's a multiple layers visible and there's underlying issues around moisture or blistering and other things, it may actually be a situation where you'd be better to take the whole lot off, just get the whole lot blasted off, and then repaint, so that you're not inheriting other problems or potentially causing an overload situation. So this is just the final summary here, and the idea here definitely wasn't to put anyone off painting concrete floors and walls. It's perfectly doable, and with the right preparation and the right specification, and I guess the right scoping about what's is expected, it's mostly totally successful. But there are some areas that catch people. So looking at this broad list here, we're saying identify the existing or potential risk factors. So I guess be realistic about what you're dealing with, or what you will be dealing with, and what the floor will be exposed to. So that's about accurately scoping the use and life cycle expected. If the clients are like, we know we'll have to redo it every couple of years because it's going to get thrashed, then that's probably more realistic, in some cases a more realistic approach than we want the top of the line paint and we want it to last forever, unless if they're not sure about how it will be used, or there's some grey areas. That's where things can come undone. It's important, I think, to particularly, again with floors, but even with the walls, is prioritise preparation and testing. Rushing into painting concrete walls and floors, particularly big ones, or particularly where there's other expenses involved, like scaffolding or access control, the more testing we can do up front to make sure that the products are going to be compatible and will perform in the situation, the better. And I'm sure we would rather help do a lot more of that than be on site with a painter looking at something and going, why did that happen, or why was this not tested? So if in doubt, check alternatives. It's particularly for floors. There would be some situations where paint as a whole may not be the best option. We have the Flowcrete product, which is excellent and would be very good in a lot of situations. So we'd be happy to make that connection for you if that was the approach that you thought would be worth evaluating for your client. But again, it comes down to ultimately what their expectation is, what the scope and performance required is, and also the key question about how will it be maintained? Will it be maintained? And what everyone's expectations are around that. So if everyone's on the same page, this stuff is pretty straightforward. But if there's ever any doubt, just get in touch with your Resene representatives or through the website, and we'll be happy to help. Thanks for listening, and happy painting. Cheers.
All right, thanks very much, David. I'll get you to jump back in there. Thanks to everyone who's stayed with us. Most people have stayed with us for the full hour there. So if anyone's needing, yep, they have. No, it was very informative. Thank you. If anyone needs to bail now, by all means, please do. We're going to just roll through a few questions. So if you want to hang on, that would be great. So a couple of questions that came in. First one from Paolo Sana. Thanks, Paolo. What textured paints are available for tilt slab panels?
The easiest one, straightforward, I guess, would be Sandtex, which is, as the name suggests, it's an acrylic with a sandy profile when it's painted on. So it comes in a couple of grades for memory. There's Resene as well. So that will give you options for like a sandpaper type finish. There's also a couple of very thick products, X300 and X400, which can be built up to quite a big heavy profile. They use a special roller, I think it's for X400 from memory, which gives you quite a strong wavy sort of profile, almost like a stucco type effect. So
Yeah, so there are a
Anything
few.
you like?
Yeah, there's quite a few. You've mentioned a few there. They go up, as you say, from that sand texture through to a kind of more of a coarse aggregate in the coating, or the higher build type acrylic coatings as well, that can give you a if you use different methods of application, like goop loop rollers, you can actually build up that texture on the surface. The one thing I would say with higher build coatings or textured coatings, the key to it is actually the application of the coating. So you can create a god-awful mess with those as well if you don't have the right application methods. We see them a fair bit with contractors putting roller marks all down a wall because they can't get an even application of the coating. So often they're best applied by spray, like big hopper units, spray units, and you really need to be working in front of you on the panels, so getting good access to the panels as well. So there's plenty of options available. We can help you out with that further, but yeah, really comes down to access and application methods as well to get a nice, even consistent finish on that.
And probably make sure the painter knows well in advance that's what you want to do. So
yeah,
there's
that's right.
time for
Absolutely.
to do a sample. You don't want to spring it on them on the day and go, oh, I want a
Yeah,
textured finish here, because
that's
that won't
right.
go down.
Yeah, everyone needs to know what's in front of them.
It's coming.
Yep. So another question came in here from Mia Waters. Thanks, Mia. When time is an issue, how can you speed up the application of floor coatings, i.e. overnight, if something has to go back into service? I think you touched on that right at the end there, David, with the flowcrete type solutions. Yeah.
Yes, some of the chemistry in there, like they've got a big range of product, and to be fair, a lot of it all sounds a bit the same, but it gets a bit complicated. But what they do have is stuff that will dry and can be ready to walk on in 45 minutes and things. So they have that overnight turnaround type product. We also, in a couple of our epoxy products, I think there's some additives that you can put in. I think it was Aquapoxy that had an additive to, or Armorcoat. Armorcoat does.
Armorcoat, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there's one or two of ours have I guess an accelerator sort of option. So it's not like anything. It's not ideal to have to hurry that sort of thing. But if the window is what it is, then that's something where we'd probably, if we knew that, we'd probably talk to the Flowcrete team early on just to see what they've got.
Yeah, I think when we're dealing with certainly commercial environments, car parks, definitely car parks, where you can only take a certain zone out of play for a very short period of time, then you really need the fast curing coatings, and they're typically with the specialist product suppliers like the Flowcrete type systems. Yeah. Another one coming in here from Karen Smith. Thanks, Karen. Are epoxy coatings always required on garage floors? Again, I think you touched on that as well around the hot tire pickup, didn't you?
Yeah, no, but I'd say no, but we would always recommend Aquapoxy. I've got a garage floor here at home that I could probably paint a lumber cider, but then I don't drive on it. The garage has got bikes rolling in and out and people walking in and out, so I could use something like walk on or even lumber cider. But if it's going to be driven on, you would probably want to look at using Aquapoxy, which isn't a complicated product to use. It's nothing like, and it definitely doesn't have any aromas like, say, Uracryl does. It's pretty straightforward. We use it in our own shops. It's really good. So
yeah. The major issues that we have with garage floors almost always is around that hot tire pickup. So it's where the car stops and the tires are hot and it just grips onto the coating, and if the surface hasn't been prepared correctly, as David mentioned earlier, with diamond grinding the surface to give the coating something to key to and the right kind of coatings, then those are the points where the coatings will come off, and can come off pretty easily if there's something not quite right there. So question in from Dominic Yun. Thanks, Dominic. I've got a concrete tilt slab panel which is very smooth and pretty new. We'd like to retain the concrete finish aesthetic, but with a clear, non-glossy matte finish, which you can remove tagging from.
Yep. So there's two ways of doing that. That would involve either graffiti shield or Uracryl 400 series. We can get, in both cases, they go to Graffiti Shield. There is a flat finish. In Uracryl 404, there's a low sheen finish. So you'd put on a layer of concrete clear, then you'd put on either of the Uracryl options over that to give you the flat finish. It won't, like I mentioned, it won't be as easy to clean as a gloss or a semi-gloss version of the same thing, but it is a hard glaze layer. And if the tilt slab itself is already very smooth, then that's at least half the battle in terms of cleanability. The concrete clear is needed just to stop it going wet looking. If you put Uracryl straight onto tilt slab, it'll look like it's been hosed with water, which some people like, but generally most don't. Actually, you could also use Imperite, now that I think about it and reflect on my own presentation I've just done.
picking up your
taking my advice there. Yeah.
Another one in from Matt Hoare. Thanks, Matt. Are there any sealers you can apply over the painted precast concrete panels to provide extra protection? I guess that's around UV, any UV stabilizers or clear coatings that you can apply.
Well, I guess you could use concrete clear and then the Uracryl clear UVS.
Yeah, so we do have a cup. That's right, our clear coat UVS. If it's depending on what types of coatings are there, we do have clear coatings that have additional UV stabilizers in them. They're always a good option, particularly with brighter and darker colors, just to retain that color fastness for a little bit longer. But again, as like we talked about earlier with other coatings, everyone needs to be aware of those up front, and they need to be specified into the system, so so that they can be used. They're often a little bit trickier to apply as well, being they're usually a gloss clear coating, although we do have some in the lower sheen as well, so that they are available, I guess, in simple terms.
Yep.
Now another one in from Mike Greenslade. Is there a sealer only for exterior masonry block walls? I assume that's just to give that completely natural look, and I assume this isn't a residential scenario. Yeah.
So, well, it depends. I guess it depends on how sealed you want to be. If we're talking concrete block walls, masonry, the baseline just for some water repellency would be the Aquapel, and then you're into concrete clear and concrete clear multiple coats, or there is a full weather type product called XC700 for concrete block, but it's got a like a glass sort of particles in it to fill in the pores in the concrete. So it definitely gives you a layer that keeps the rain out, but it also, at a close up, you can notice it can be a bit sort of milky looking. It works, but it's maybe not aesthetically what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think just to add, I think the kicker here is building code requirements around weather tightness, and you touched on it earlier as well, as more often than not, the requirement here is for a weather tight system on the exterior of masonry blocks, because they're inherently not considered weather tight. And then you would defer to the CCANZ code of practice for the coating requirements, and then that would trigger the higher build clear coating, like you just mentioned, David, the XC700 for exterior masonry block walls to achieve, I think it's a minimum of 180 micron film thickness, and there's permeability requirements as well for clear coatings on masonry blocks. So typically it's triggered by the building code requirement for to defer to CCANZ code of practice. Now, that's really good. We do have some other questions that have come in there, but I'm conscious of everyone's time. So what we'll do is we'll wind it up now. Anyone else that has fired a question in that we haven't got to, we absolutely will come back to you in the next few days, because we have a record of all those questions that have come in. So thanks, David, for your time again. If anyone's after David's contact details, they will be in the follow-up email that'll come through tomorrow as well. So thanks to all that have tuned in today, and particularly those that have stayed with us. We've actually got quite a few that have hung on in there. Thanks very much. It's most appreciated. We will see you all at our next webinar. Thanks for tuning in, and bye for now.
Cheers.